Hi everyone. I'm gonna wait a bit until we have more people on. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and start the intro. Good evening and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore, Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Lyndall Clipstone to discuss her new novel, Forestfall, published by our friends at Henry Holt & Co. A bit about the author and the moderator. Lyndall Clipstone is a young adult author. Her debut novel, Lake's Edge, a gothic fantasy, was published by Holt. The sequel, Forestfall, is the book we'll be discussing today. A former youth librarian, she has a bachelor's in creative writing and a graduate diploma in library and information management. She has participated as both a mentee and mentor in author-mentor match and lives in Adelaide, South Australia with her partner and 2 sons. To moderate this evening's conversation, we're joined by Emily Lloyd-Jones, who grew up on a vineyard in rural Oregon, where she played in evergreen forests and learned to fear sheep. She has a BA in English from Western Oregon University and a MA in publishing from Rosemont College. She currently resides in Northern California, where she enjoys wandering in redwood forests. Her young adult novels include Elusive, Deceptive, The Hearts We Sold, The Bone Houses, and The Drowned Woods. Just a quick reminder that we're going to be doing a Q&A after this discussion. So throughout this evening's broadcast, you can post questions below in the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen. I really encourage you guys to participate, and please order your copy of Forestfall from Books and Books and support independent bookstores. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. This might take me a little bit.
Hello, everybody. I'm Emily.
Mute thing down the bottom of my thing, but maybe it's fine.
I can hear you. We're good, I think.
Okay, good. That's all good. Just a little bit of technical difficulties. Hi, it's so exciting to talk with you. Thank you so much for coming to help me launch Forestfall into the world.
Thank you so much for having me. Lake's Edge is one of my favorite reads of last year, so getting to read Forestfall early was just such a thrill. I love both books so much. They are just so good. And I'm so excited that everyone's going to be able to read the finished duology now. So yay, congratulations on this week's release.
Thank you. It feels really surreal to have it all out in the world and the series is all finished, but I'm really excited for people to get to read the end and for the story to be out for readers.
So yeah, that must be super surreal because you've been working on this for years and now it's out in the world for everyone to enjoy.
Yeah, it's kind of nice though. I think I was ready to say goodbye to the world. I'm really glad that I got to spend 2 books with everybody, and it's nice to be able to sort of move on to the next thing, even though it does feel a bit bittersweet to be finished with the series.
Yeah, it's always a bit nostalgic to be moving on to the next thing, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's exciting too to be able to sort of think about a story with a new world and a new magic system and new characters, as well as I think I'm always going to miss Lake's Edge. It feels like such a special. I think the first book that you publish is always going to have a special kind of feeling.
It's very true. So can you tell us a little bit about how you came to write The World at Lake's Edge? I know we always have to ask the question of what inspired this book. So what inspired these books?
I've talked a little bit about it here and there. So the original idea for Lake's Edge was a short story that I wrote during my creative writing honors year. And I'd always sort of thought if I had time, I would love to revisit it and turn it into a novel-length piece of writing. So it was about 10 years between when I wrote that short piece and when I sat down to write Lake's Edge. So I guess just needed a lot of time to mull over the idea before I figured out how I wanted to write it. The concept I had was like, what if The Secret Garden was a gothic romance novel? So that was the sort of starting point.
That makes total sense in hindsight. Yes, I can totally see it.
Yeah.
Which also explains why I love these books so much, because The Secret Garden, I love that.
Yeah, I think growing up, especially with like the 1994 movie, like it just had such a good aesthetic to it. Or I think the idea of having like a big haunted house full of secrets was very appealing. So yeah, I wanted to write the type of book that I would have loved to read as a teenager. So I think I was thinking a lot of my teenage self when I sat down to write it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of us, even if we didn't read the book, most of us saw that movie back in the 90s. It was such a good movie. The aesthetic was just so good. So can you give us a quick introduction to your three main characters, Leta, Rowan, and the Lord Under?
Okay, so Leta is my favorite type of heroine to write. She's fierce and loyal and protective, but she's also very flawed and makes a lot of very impulsive decisions. And I really love the idea of writing like a messy, imperfect character. I know that she's been quite divisive for readers. I get quite a lot of negative feedback with people who are like frustrated with her, annoyed with her, which I think is like kind of unfair, because that's sort of the point, that she's meant to be imperfect and frustrating and making bad choices, because I felt that that was kind of important to write in a YA book, because I certainly as a young adult was messy and frustrating and made a lot of impulsive choices, and I think it's nice for readers to see imperfect, messy characters who are still able to be the heroes even though they're not doing 100% wonderful, good, well thought out things all the time. So yeah, that's her. I think she's like the perfect combination of fierceness and softness too, because she has like a sort of layer of tenderness beneath all of the sort of fire that she has as well. And so that's probably my favorite thing about her. And Rowan is another sort of favorite type of character, the like brooding goth boy, soft monster archetype. So he's known as the monster of Lake's Edge, and it's sort of a reputation that he's cultivated because he, especially in the first book, tries very hard to keep everyone at a distance. He's very much like the "don't look at me, let me suffer alone" type of character. And I think my favorite thing about writing him and Leta was the way that they have this really gradual unfolding of seeing so many similarities between one another and opening up and trusting each other when neither of them has really trusted anyone at that, like in the same way before. So that was a really fun thing to write. And I loved getting to write his point of view in Forestfall as well. And then finally, we have the Lord Under, who's the fan favorite. He's the Lord of the Dead. And how could we not love an alluring death god? He was definitely like the funnest character to put together. So he can grant bargains to those who are close to death at a price, of course. But he and Leta share a unique connection where she can see and summon him and speak to him even though she's not dead. So because of this connection, he sort of offers her a path to getting what she wants, which is the power to protect everyone she cares about. And one of my favorite things about her story arc was playing with this idea of like power and powerlessness, and like how you can be empowered, or how you make your way through a world where you're starting with very little power, and the temptation of like what he offers versus the price that it will come at was a really interesting thing for me to explore with her. So yeah, and then in Forestfall, their connection starts to change in that he has a very clear idea of what he wants from her and what he intends to use her for, but then the bond between them kind of has unintended consequences on his end. So I think that was a really fun and interesting thing to explore, this idea of like power having a price, but it also going both ways as well.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun reading from Rowan's perspective in this book. It was just really enjoyable to get into his head, especially because I love him and Letta together, just because they are really complementary. They're both so self-sufficient. So watching each other, come to depend on each other it was like everything I want in a ship. It was really fun.
They were such a fun pair to write. And I really loved getting to write his point of view. It felt very I fell into his voice quite easily, which was a surprise because I'd spent so much time writing Letta that I wondered if I would struggle to change tone or change voice. But I think I had such a strong sense of him just from working on the first book that it was really lovely to let him step more into the forefront of the narrative for this book.
Yeah, I think it flowed very naturally when I was reading it. It just felt like this was supposed to definitely be written partly from his perspective, and it just fits so well. I like him a lot. He's one of my favorite characters. So the magic of this world. Yes, he's just so much fun. I know it's weird to say about a goth boy, but I like, the self-sufficient, monster gothy boys. They're always just so much fun to read about. So the magic of this world, it's so important to the emotional journeys of all of your characters. Can I ask how you developed this world's magic, its myths, its internal mythology? How did that come about?
So the actual magic system, which is a very loose, vibey type of alchemy, which I think I very roughly based on the alchemy in Full Metal Alchemist, the anime.
That's
although
great.
I feel like anybody who's a true interest in alchemy will probably be like, what have you done? This is a complete diversion from the thing. But I always love to be very loose and kind of vibey with my magic systems. I'm not really someone who wants to have a full high fantasy, very well thought out, structured. I'm more interested about how it feels, the experience of the magic working and how the characters interact with it. So I really loved the idea of playing a lot with balance and the price of power. And so even to work an alchemical spell, you have to mark it on your skin, and then once you've cast the spell, it's forever marked on you. So there's always going to be a cost to work magic, and that was sort of fun for me to play with, that there's this physical kind of toll or reminder of the power that you've handled, I guess. But I think overall in the story, I really liked playing with this idea of balance and how there's no sort of good, evil, dark, light, but the two need to sort of exist together for everything to work properly. And the whole thing in Lake's Edge about the corruption was that light and dark, or good and bad, or whatever, were out of balance. So I think it was fun to play more with this idea of balance and imbalance and what needed to be done to maintain this status quo in the world throughout Forestfall. And I think it also comes into play with the way that monstrosity works in the narrative as well. So with Rowan, I was very determined when I wrote Forestfall that his monstrosity wasn't something that he needed to be cured from, because I didn't want it to be something that was needed to be taken away to make him good or healed or proper or whatever. So I really liked the idea of his monstrosity becoming something that was integrated into part of him, and it was an essential part of himself rather than something that needed to be removed. So playing with that a little bit more in Forestfall was also really fun.
Yeah, I really liked that a lot. As someone who writes a lot of monsters and enjoys the whole monster aesthetic. And I have to ask, as one person who writes a lot of monsters to another, what is your opinion on why everyone loves monsters so much?
Because it's really, I have no idea. I personally have just always been drawn to darker kind of things, even from when I was very young. I remember being obsessed with Interview with a Vampire and the Addams Family as a kid. I feel very, the Beetlejuice movie, how Lydia's I myself am strange and unusual. That was me as a young a kid. And a teenager. I've just always really loved dark, spooky things. And I don't know, like for me, I think monsters in fiction it's this way of exploring things that might be confronting or scary or threatening to us, but it's in a contained space where there's a resolution at the end. And so we can interact with things like the concept of death or physical transformation or loss of power or danger, but in a way that is safe because it's fictional. And so it's like an escapism rather than having to confront it in real life. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's
That
kind of
makes
how.
total sense. Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
And in terms of romance, I've always really loved the idea of like the strength that comes from being the one that the monster won't hurt, I guess. Like one of my favorite, like I think the first pieces of media that I saw that kind of imprinted that on me was the Silence of the Lambs movie, which now everybody's like a Will Graham and Hannibal Shepard, but I was like a Starling and Lecter fan, and just like how they had this sort of like weird respect between them. And at the end, she's like, no, he won't come after me because he would think that would be rude. And he's like, the world's more interesting with you in it. I don't know, there's just something really alluring to me as an author who likes to play with ideas of power and power dynamic and interpersonal relationships, of having something that's like physically terrifying and physically powerful in the form of a monster, but having like another character being able to kind of counterbalance that through their own means. And yeah, I don't know, it's just, I really enjoy it. I wonder, like, I don't know if there's any kind of universal thing that makes everybody love monsters, but it's definitely something that I've always really enjoyed.
I mean, I always have. I remember that one quote, I think it was going around like Tumblr a few years back. I had no idea where it's from, where it was like, when is a monster not a monster? When you love it. And I just like, yep.
I know. I'm not sure what that's from. I have that saved on like a Pinterest board, I'm pretty sure.
I think that was just like floating around the internet for so many years now.
Just Tumblr quotes, always the best. Yeah, it is like, there's just something about like, and I think maybe, especially if there's been things about like the self where it may have been seen as monstrous or like unacceptable by society or whatever. Like I was like a really weird, strange kid who didn't fit in very well in my peer group, and definitely felt a lot of like otherness in terms of the way I was treated. Like I was this weirdo who grew up in like a really tiny country town, and I think being able to sort of take the power of making like a monster something that's alluring and actually like a character strength is really enjoyable as well.
Definitely. Like taking the otherness and turning it into superpower, basically.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned some of your favorite romances. What are some of your favorite Gothic books? Since you're writing Gothic romance, I figured we'd ask for some, recommendations.
Actually, in the paperback of Lake's Edge, I put like a little reading list because I loved being able to do those. But a few of my all-time sort of favorites are Keturah and Lord Death by Martine Leavitt, which is this really beautiful sort of fairy tale vibe story where a girl gets lost in the woods and death comes to her, and of course he's very handsome. And then he's like, okay, I'm here to take you, but she kind of bargains with him to buy herself like some more time. And so she's like, you can't like take me because I haven't found my true love. So he's like, okay, well, you have this limited amount of time to find someone to fall in love with, or I will come and claim you. And it's really one of those stories where it's this beautiful simplicity, but it feels very like there's sort of layers beneath the like very simple fairy tale narrative to it, and I love it so much. And then also Heart's Blood by Juliette Marillier, which is kind of a Beauty and the Beast retelling set in like the same sort of universe that a lot of her books are in, which is like sort of, I guess, medieval fantasy island, kind of, is that. So it's like a girl who goes to stay at like this house where everybody sort of fears that it's overtaken by ghosts, and she falls in love with the brooding lord who lives there. So that was one of the big inspirations for me when I was writing Lake's Edge. It's just really lovely. I love the way that she writes female characters, especially, and romances, and it's really beautiful. And then I guess We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson as well, with anything by Shirley Jackson really, but We've Always Lived in the Castle is just this forever favorite. And I know, I'm not sure if it's like a typical sort of gothic romance. I suppose people would generally say Hill House was like her more gothic book, but there's just something about like the weirdness and darkness of the narrative and the way that like there's so many secrets woven beneath like what again feels like a very simple story. I love it. I feel like every time I read it, I'm always kind of searching, like if I read more closely, I'll find like the truth. And I love books that make me feel like that. So yeah, I think just the really vivid sort of story of this like crumbling down house that they're living in, and how Mary Cat's woven all of her spells by burying things in the grounds around it. I really love that part of it. So that's my three favorites that I thought of for the moment, but there's always so many more. So yeah, if anyone has the Lake Touch paperback, you can have a look in the back and see my book and film list that I made.
That's awesome. Yeah, it seems like setting is just so important to Gothic romances. It's always, all of, The Haunting of Hill House, all of those. Whenever I read them, you just get such a strong sense of place, which is one of the things that I loved about Lake's Edge and Forestfall, is the setting is just so important. It's part of the titles. So are those places inspired by anywhere in your real life? Was it entirely from your imagination?
So I very roughly based it on where I grew up. So I grew up in the Barossa Ranges, which is like a sort of rural, hilly kind of area just outside of the Barossa Valley in South Australia. I'm trying to think of like an American equivalent. I don't know. I mean, probably like a very rural, like Northern California, perhaps would be like a similar. So kind of like a lot of natural, like I grew up in like a property that had like big hills with like granite rocks and a big mix of like native Australian sort of environment with like blackberries and pine trees coming through as well. And at the time, like growing up there, I found it, I don't think I enjoyed it as much as I have like memories of, like I'm very nostalgic for it now. Like as a teenager, I think it was hard growing up in the country, but I really, really like felt quite nostalgic for it, and like the childhood that I spent kind of roaming around in the forest and things like that. So when I wrote Lake Edge, I really wanted to capture a lot of my really good memories of that place. So I think that was where a lot of the inspiration came from. I wanted to write something that felt like the kind of fantasy landscape that was familiar to me, because I know like a lot of fantasy stories would have like snowy forests or spooky kind of like European type woodsy settings, but were like that wasn't the sort of terrain that I grew up in. So I liked the idea of trying to play with having like a sort of Australian landscape that was kind of gothic as well.
I really love that because, after a while, the generic European medieval fantasy setting can get a little bit redundant. So I loved reading about a place that was so very clearly specific. Like I felt that was such a strength of the book, was just getting lost in this world that I've never visited. And I would love to go there someday.
Yeah, it was really fun. And I think that was partly why I chose to set it in summer as well, because here, like winter is quite a mild season and the summers are very harsh. Like it's really hot, dry, sort of arid summers with like big threat of bushfires and things like that. And it's definitely like the more oppressive and claustrophobic feeling weather than the cold. So I like the idea of trying to play with like, could I make a summer book feel spooky? Kind of, and then like Midsummer came out when I was, I think, just after Lake's Edge, I'd finished writing it, and so I was like, yes, this is so cool. Like I love seeing someone else play around with like a spooky summer.
Yep, I think they definitely, both you and Midsummer, proved that summer can be very spooky if you write it well. So when you were writing these books, did anything come as a surprise, or did you plot out everything in advance?
So I think for Lake Search, because it was the first book it wasn't the first book that I'd written, but it was the first like finished manuscript book length thing that I'd written. So it's hard to say because I spent so much time working on it and so much time revising it, and it went through so many different revisions. It was like the book that I queried and that I got an agent with, and the first book I went on sub with. So I feel like my process kind of changes with everything I write as I get a bit more efficient and familiar with like the craft side of things. But definitely with Forestfall, I had like a very rough outline and knew very vaguely like key sort of points, you know, like I'm like, oh, okay, I know this is what I want to happen at like the climax, and this is how I want it to end, and this is sort of like the vague midpoint thing that I want to happen. But then a lot of smaller things as I was working on it, the decisions were kind of made just by how it felt, which feels very like intangible, but often I'll sort of be revising or writing something which I've got like a very loose outline for, and then it just doesn't feel right. And so I'll have to sort of pull back and think about, okay, well, what decisions or like what could happen in the scene that would make me feel excited as the author to write it. And usually when I land on something where like it does feel exciting, that's how I know that it's the right choice. So yeah, it's very like vibe based, I guess, but it seems to be how it works for me. I think it's nice to trust a little bit up to like gut emotion, even if you do plot out a story, because like that's one of the fun things about being an author is that we get to, you know, we're in control, we get to create whatever we want, and it's nice to be surprised by the story as you go along.
I think of it as sort of like, you know, you're sitting down in the sandbox, and sometimes, you know, what you make is exciting and new and surprising.
Yeah, it's definitely like a fun part of the journey. I mean, it's frustrating too when you're like, okay, here's this very clear idea that I have for the thing, and then you'll write it and it's like this doesn't feel right, and technically it's fine, but you know, like it's on a gut level, I'm not happy with it. And so then there's like that frustration of like, well, how do I fix this? And then when you do figure it out, it's usually like equal parts exciting and frustrating, because you know, I'm enthusiastic to get in there and make the changes, but at the same time it's like, oh god, like all this work that I just did. But yeah, I love hate it, I guess. Like I think I find revising a lot more sort of creatively stimulating than drafting. Like getting the first draft down is always really hard for me, but the refining stage and making like the choices of like how the scene will feel is my favorite part.
Mm-hmm. I feel like drafting is equal parts, yeah, joy and frustration all rolled into one. So is there any scene? Like... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, that's okay. I was just gonna commiserate a bit more about drafting, but you can go.
I'm currently drafting, so I'm just like, oh.
I feel you. I'm like, yeah, I'm sort of at the stage now where I have to start thinking about like my next project, and it's like I'm gonna enjoy just having it be like a Pinterest board for a while before I actually have to settle down onto an outline in a draft.
Yeah, the Pinterest board is a valuable part of the drafting process. So without spoiling anything too much, is there a specific scene that you're very excited about for your readers to get to in Forestfall?
So there's a few parts. I think one thing I'm excited for is for the readers to meet the new characters, who I've deliberately tried to be vague about, because I think the fun comes in discovering them in the narrative and finding out who they are. But they were a lot of fun to write and put into the book, and like the sort of new dynamic that they added into the story was very, very fun. And I'm excited for people to read the twist near the end, because I can never tell if something is actually twisty or not, because obviously as the author, like I know what's going to happen. So I loved when some early readers got to that point and they were like, oh no, and it's just like, oh, it did feel like a twist. I'm so glad that it landed. So I'm excited for readers to experience that. And my favorite romance scene is the throne room scene near the end. So I'm very excited for people to read that one too.
Well, it definitely fooled me, so.
Oh, that's good. I think it's like it's always fun to get that feedback because yeah, like it's really hard to know if your own writing is like suspenseful or twisty because you've looked at it so many times. So
It's hard to surprise yourself when you've drafted something and redrafted and revised. Yeah. So who was their favorite character to write? Who was the easiest and who was the hardest?
I think Rowan was the easiest to write, actually. Like he's always been my favorite. I think there was a lot of myself in him, like not so much intentionally, but there was a lot of sort of I think I'm definitely like leaning towards being more serious and introverted than Letta. So she was fun to write like with her like silliness, which is definitely not something that I am naturally like. But there was a lot of my emotions went into Rowan, I think. And so I think I enjoyed writing him, and that was probably why I enjoyed writing his point of view quite a lot too. It was really lovely to sort of get closer to him, especially like I think I felt quite emotional in like the end chapter where he's sort of looking ahead to like the future, like near the end of the book, and he's sort of like, oh, okay, this is what my life's going to be like now. And I was just like, oh, my baby's growing up. And the hardest was probably the Lord Under, surprisingly enough. I think because he's such a strong sort of archetypal sort of character, I really wanted to make sure that he had depth beyond just being like the villain or like the like the brooding supernatural kind of character. But I had to sort of walk this balance of like trying to give him complexity without making him too human, I guess. And like I was constantly getting feedback, especially from my agent reading like the early version. So she was like, don't make him too soft, don't make him too human. Like and it was a fun challenge, but definitely like a difficult one to try and infuse that like level of depth, but still making him feel very like villainous and otherworldly.
That's awesome. Yeah, it was interesting getting to read more about him in this book too. So that was a lot of fun. So in addition to being an author, you're also an artist, and your artwork is featured in the books, which is so cool.
Yeah.
They're so pretty.
Yeah, so I drew like the frontispiece and the chapter headers in Lake's Edge and in Forestfall, and the Owl Crate Lake's Edge and Forestfall has like my illustrations on the covers, so that was really fun getting to do that.
Yeah, that edition is so pretty.
It is so pretty.
So did you always know you wanted to do both? Like, what was your journey to becoming an artist as well as a writer?
I think I always enjoyed writing and drawing kind of equally. I definitely think originally I wanted to be a photographer. Like this was like pre-digital age. I wanted to be like a film photographer. And when I was in high school, I did like darkroom photography as my art course and things like that. And I contemplated going to art school, but sort of talked myself out of it because I was like, oh, I'll never be able to get a proper job and I can do art in my free time. And so I'll go to university. And I don't know why I thought going to get an arts degree would get me a proper job. But anyway, the time it seemed like a good idea. No, I think that's right. When I started university, I intended to be a psychologist. And then I realized that like that was completely not a good fit for me. And then I leaned more into doing like English literature. But art was always just like a hobby and something that I really enjoyed. And there were a few times where I tried to sort of make it into a career, but it never felt right. Like I had like a couple of little exhibitions. We have like a thing called the Sala Festival here, which is like South Australian artists, and I had an exhibition and got nominated for an award, which was really fun. When my kids were little, I used to draw a lot of like mom and baby sort of pictures, which was fun. So an exhibition of like that style of art. But as writing became my career, I've really enjoyed having something creative to do that's just mine, like that's no pressure. I don't have to, it's not going to get evaluated by people. I don't have to try and sell it. I don't have to, like there's no like, it's very low stakes, and it's really nice to have something creative to do that's like a creative outlet that doesn't feel like work. So as much as I've loved having a career as an author, it's been really nice to keep some kind of creativity that's just mine as well. So that's been fun. And I like being able to sort of choose to have some of my illustration be part of the writing. I really love getting to do the chapter headers. I hope I can continue to add little tiny illustrations to other books if I do in the future.
That's awesome. Yeah, I totally get it. When you're writing as your career, it's really nice to have a creative outlet that is not linked to your career all the time.
Yeah, it's sort of funny because like writing goes from being like this thing that you do for like as a hobby and for fun, and then like it becomes a career, which is like truly the dream, but it's like it doesn't feel like an escape to sit down and write. I mean, not that writing for work is not enjoyable. Like I really, really enjoy working on my books, but it's nice to have something creative to do that is still like just a fun thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun work, but it's still work. Whenever I open a document, it's like going to the office. So yeah, it's interesting how the relationship to writing changes as, we grow as authors. So I personally got into gaming because I needed something to do that was not writing.
I love gaming as well. Like, especially, I think the thing with drawing for me is it's very like, it has to be the stars have to align properly for me to like feel in the mood to draw it, and also for it to work out. It's not something I can force, which is probably why like I never really wanted to have like a career as an illustrator or anything. But I love gaming. It's like perfect. I think it's the perfect complement to being an author. Like when your brain is just really busy and you feel too restless to sort of settle down and read a book or do anything, but you can't focus on like a TV show or movie. So I played a lot of Hades when I was in copy edits for Forestfall, because that was like that perfect mix of like not too complex, but just enough storyline to be engaging. And so that was like my downtime was doing like a Hades run.
I need to play that one.
It's really, really cute and fun. And it's like one of those, I think, is it called like a roguelike game where you run through and like you just keep doing the same run over and over, but like you get like more skills each time you die. So I really like it. At the moment I'm playing through Fallout New Vegas because my partner just got an Xbox. So nice. I'm like, finally I can play all these games, like because we had like an Xbox like a long time ago, and so there's all these games that I used to play many years ago that I'm getting to revisit now. So that's been fun.
Yeah, that one's on my list. I'm currently trying to get through Skyrim for the third time. I keep getting sidetracked by like random quests, and I'm like, at some point I'm actually going to finish this game and not just like run off and become a vampire.
I really want to play Skyrim. I think I tried to get into it, but it was like a while ago and I just didn't have the time. But I love those sort of open world games. So
yeah, I like the games where you can just sort of, forge your own story a little bit.
Definitely. Like I think Dragon Age has always been my favorite. So like I played so much Dragon Age Inquisition. That's just, I loved so much about it.
Mass Effect, so much Mass Effect.
It's like BioWare just do like that perfect, like being able to sort of immerse yourself into the story so well. Like I played like the Knights of the Old Republic games before Dragon Age as well, because that had the same sort of thing. And like whenever I'm playing something, like I was playing through Horizon Zero Dawn and I'm like, why can't I like romance this guy? And my partner's like, it's not Dragon Age. I'm just like, well, it should be.
I just like being able to ride the robot dinosaurs, like, That was my favorite part. I was like, what do you mean I get a robot horse thing? This is awesome. So can I ask what you're working on right now? You alluded to perhaps working on something new. Anything you can tell us about it?
So I've been calling it Love Bite in my social media when I talk about working on it. So it's a new gothic romance. It's a standalone, so it's separate from the world of Lakes Edge and Forestfall, with entirely new characters and world building and things like that, which has been very fun. So yeah, I think it's like maybe darker and more romantic and more like literary and poetic than the first two books that I wrote, which has been like a really fun, like I think I had a clearer vision of like the sort of thing that I wanted to write as an author with this. Like I really wanted to dig into like my favorite things about writing, like very lyrical prose and very intimate small stakes sort of stories. So hopefully I will be able to share more about that soon. It's sort of in that kind of stage where it's still kind of secretish, but like, yeah, little bits will start
That's so
escaping, I
exciting.
suppose. But yeah, I'm really, really excited to be able to share more about it with everybody.
Well, I can't wait to read more about it because, yeah, that sounds awesome. So it looks like we're coming up on 40 minutes. So I think maybe we're going to answer chat questions or something. Which,
yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, let's move on to the Q&A. That was such a fun discussion, you guys. I really liked the gaming bit. I loved it. And also, I really, really enjoyed hearing about the background, especially the inspiration to the landscape of your story. And it just had me thinking, what was the writing process for this like? Did it take a long time for you to sort of form this world? Was there a specific research process? Um,
Um, I think because the idea was something that I'd had for such a long time, it was something that I kind of mulled over for such a long time. And then I don't know, like the writing process, like for me, I'm very much like I'm not really a researcher or that sort of world builder with writing. For me, like research is a lot of like consuming other media. So like watching films, listening to music, reading other books that kind of inspire me with things that I want to infuse into my own work. So yeah, there was a lot of that sort of thing. And like just because it was very much this like book that was written as kind of like a love letter to my teenage self, I think I drew on a lot of the things that I really loved as a teenager, like movies and books and things like that as well for inspiration.
that's really nice. So we have a couple questions from the audience. Margie asked, I need to know about how the Lord Under came to enter an already started storyline. Loved both Lake's Edge and Forestfall. Congratulations.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. So originally, like in the very original version of Lake's Edge, the Lord Under wasn't actually a character. Like he was in it as like a deity, but I think he was very briefly mentioned in like the final scene. Um, like in the original sort of version where like Letta mended the corruption and she sort of saw the Lord Under as it was happening. And that was kind of it was left open-ended to be like a sequel where he was going to come back into it, but in a very different way. um, so yeah, and then when I was revising it, I was lucky enough to be mentored by another author who helped me get it ready to query. And she said, "You don't really have like an antagonist in the story, and like, what about the Lord Under, who like you mentioned at the end? I wonder if we could give him like a bigger role." And so I started to write him like as more like a more prominent sort of character, and I realized that like it was adding sort of so many of my favorite things to the book. And I think at the time I also read the Grisha trilogy for the first time, and sort of reading about the Darkling made me realize how much fun it would be to put like a true villainous character into the book. So yeah, he just kind of came into it, and it was definitely one of those writing decisions where as soon as I realized that I needed to make room for him in the narrative, so many things sort of fell into place, and he became such a big central part of the plot.
That's really cool. Another question that we had is from Angelica, and she asked, what was the inspiration for Letta's dresses? I adore them all.
So I really love it. Was like such a like wish fulfillment thing drawing all these dresses. But there's actually a designer called Paolo Sebastian who is from Adelaide, where I live. And he makes these really, really beautiful wedding type gowns. He did like a series that were like fairy tale inspired ones. And I think I really love the idea of just her having these really beautiful, impractical, like vibey gothic kind of dresses. But as well, like I think in terms of like the plot, it was just I think her coming to Lake's Edge, it's this gradual sort of like she's had this very like hard scrabble life where there's it's been purely about survival and taking care of Arian. And so her being able to be offered sort of things like her own bedroom and beautiful clothes and the books that Rowan gives her and the garden, like it's just this kind of like gradual, like allowing her to sort of soften into like, you know, like you can have like a safe place to land, which is ironic when like the safe place to land is being taken over by a terrible magical curse, but you know what I mean. And it was really fun to think of, like, in terms of Rowan, who is perhaps not particularly good at communicating his feelings. He's like, I like the idea of him trying to show her like that he cares about her without actually being able to voice it. Maybe even to himself. Like I can see like he's like, this is just a practical gift. Like you need clothes. Like there's no meaning behind it. But of course it's like this really beautiful, like elaborate elaborate gown. So yeah, it was a fun sort of aesthetic choice, but also I liked what it sort of gave to her in the narrative.
The love language of fashion.
Yeah.
Another question by Angelica. She asked, would you ever write/release stories from the Violet Woods or latest family fairy tales?
I think that would be really fun, actually, like a little meta narrative. The Maiden in the Labyrinth story that Letta kind of tells is just a very loose like retelling of like I guess Theseus and the Minotaur, but I suppose with like Ariadne replaced Theseus. That's made like taking like the inspiration and running with it, or combined with like I guess Theseus and the Minotaur combined with like the Labyrinth film. So I think it would be really fun to do that. The Violet Woods is actually based on, there's like a few different ones. There's like the Violet Fairy book and the Blue Fairy book that are like old fairy tale collections. And they have these really beautiful, like gilded sort of illustrated covers. So that was where I drew the inspiration for that. But yeah, maybe that would be fun. I'd also really love to write like an epilogue sort of short story. So maybe one day, I think when like I've had a little bit of time away from the books, it would be a nice way to revisit the world by doing that.
That's really cool. We have another question. Your book aesthetics are visceral. Every time I read, I feel like I'm there with Rowan and Letta. What's your writing space like? I can imagine you have gothic music playing and candles. Happy the birthday week, Morgan.
Oh, thank you. You can sort of see my writing space a little bit. I'm sitting at my desk right now. I have two children who are school age, and so in an ideal day, I love to set up and have like a very sort of aesthetic, ritualized writing space where I'll have a candle and I'll play. I usually like to have like instrumental sort of background music or like symphonic heavy metal, but like just turned down very low. And like I'll make like a pot of tea, and in the winter I like to sit in like either in my bedroom or in the living room next to the fireplace to write. So there's like, I think I do like to sort of have like a little bit of grounding where like I have like a nice space. I have a desk, like we turned one of the rooms into our house into an office. You can sort of see my partner's desk behind me because during COVID he was working from home, so we set up like a desk for him in here too. And it's nice having like this little corner where I can come and shut my door. And I think I was telling you a little bit before, it's now become like a cat den because we're fostering a cat. So I've got him because he's very shy, and I'm like, if I let him out of this room, I'll never find him again because he'll just go and hide somewhere in the house. So now it's also become the cat room, and I had to take all my indoor plants out. But it's been really nice having like this little space. But yeah, I think it's like kind of a mix between like having like this really idealized space, but usually I at least try to like light a candle and have some sort of music in the background. And also sometimes when I'm drafting, there'll be like a particular book or like maybe some poetry that I'll read like a chapter of before I get started, just to kind of set the tone of voice that I want to use in my head, which is yeah. So like when I was working on Love Bite, I had this really battered paperback novel that I'd been carrying around with me, and it was like a security blanket. Whenever I sat down to draft, I had to have it in the room even if I wasn't looking at it.
No, I completely get that. I feel like a cute little corner will get me like pretty productive too. I need to have like a setup. Um, but yeah, I those are all the questions that we have for today, unless anybody else wants to add on. But I think we're at 50 minutes, so I think maybe we should do the outro. Really, really, really want to thank you guys for hopping on. I really appreciate you guys, and Books and Books included. It has been an absolute pleasure to host this discussion. It was really fun. I hope everyone watching learned as much as I did. Again, on behalf of Books and Books, I really want to thank the audience for joining and for their participation. It means so much. And also, please do not forget to check out Forestfall or Lake's Edge if you haven't already. And yeah, I really hope everyone has an incredible night. And remember to support independent bookstores. So yeah, thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much for hosting. This has been lovely. And thank you, Emily, for asking such excellent questions.
Thank you for having me. It's been so much fun.
I really, really like this, guys. I'm gonna end the broadcast, but yeah, have a good day, everyone.
Bye.